You're listening to the Stories of Subi podcast, which has been produced for the Subi East project. The Stories of Subi are brought to you by DevelopmentWA in collaboration with Creating Communities Australia. The Subi East area has a rich history, and we're bringing you conversations with the people who can provide interesting perspectives on the great memories, history, and changes they've seen. Everyone knows Dennis Cometti is a legendary sports commentator, injecting drama and electricity into the great game of AFL. But he's also played, coached, lived and breathed WA footy for a long time, and I'm going to pick his brains about Subi Oval. Dennis, tell me about going to Subi Oval as a young kid with your dad.
Started about 8 actually. My dad was Jim. He used to take me to the footy a lot. We both loved the footy. I can remember going down to Subiaco Oval. Those gates of the thing, I remember them. We'd queue up for finals. And the deal was, when the gates opened, there were only 4 rows of seats around the ground in the outer, so you had to go quickly, suddenly leave your father and run ahead and save some seats. That's what I had to do. That was my job in the finals at Subiaco Oval. But those gates were like walking into Disneyland for me. It just felt great. I loved football, I loved the people who played it, and I really loved the atmosphere. Getting there that early meant you saw a lot of football that day, but I couldn't get enough.
Can you give us a sense, for younger people listening to this who didn't know WA footy before it was part of AFL, what was the culture around Waffle?
Well, it was huge. I mean, had terrific crowds. 30,000 would go to the grand final, for example, and that was big because in terms of the percentage of the population of Perth at that time, that was very large. And for a player like myself coming through the ranks, underage football and what have you, they were the biggest things in town, our stars. They were locally grown. And for me, you'd come through the under-14s, the under-16s, the under-18s in your district. Everyone played football. It was really the only game in town. And you'd come up against the same kids. You'd have, say, at the halfway mark of the season, then at the end you'd play other jurisdictions, other zones like Subiaco and East Fremantle. I played in West Perth. And you'd be sort of part of the league team, if you like, if you made one of those, what they call combined sides. If you made one of those, you were in the funnel. You were on your way, your journey had begun, and who knows, you could finish up playing league football for West Perth, or in the case of a boy from Palmyra, East Fremantle. But no, it was really something. It was really something. It's hard when you reminisce not to get excited about things and perhaps get them out of perspective, but football in those days had some of the greatest players I've seen.
You went for East Freo. Can you tell me...
That was a mistake, actually, because I lived in Mount Yokine. They were the first team I saw against East Perth at Perth Oval. The man over the road took me to the footy. He was an East Perth supporter, and I picked East Fremantle. Geographically, it was a shocking mistake.
Not ideal.
Not ideal.
Tell me about watching them in a grand final. Give me a sense of the atmosphere at Subi Oval.
I mean, you understand it's the culmination of the season. It's a big deal if you're a person who loves his football. So they were big games and some great games and some wonderful players. When I think back, I can pick it up sort of in the late 50s and take it through until 1970 and beyond as a commentator. But it sort of lacked nothing, at least to a boy growing up. Now, my father was a football lover, and it was after the war. A lot of things had changed for a lot of people like my dad, and just going to the footy, I mean, that was a breeze for him after, being in New Guinea or something, and I just tagged along.
Given that footy was such a big deal in your family, and you and your dad loved it so much.
My mum wasn't into it so much, though.
Your mum wasn't into it?
Back,
so
yeah.
It was you and your dad?
I remember that, yeah.
How big of a deal was it when you started playing competitively and you were playing in this really highly regarded competition?
Yes, well, I think he had some enjoyment out of it. We sort of did it as a duo, but he died very young. He died just after I'd turned 18, so he didn't get to see the really good parts that came afterwards. Sort of initially playing for West Perth, I enjoyed that and had some success, but radio was my first love. This sounds odd. Should be a program on radio. But no, the two things side by side. And radio is not something you need to make your footy better. And I did get hurt, so that's the story, the background behind it. But No, he missed the good times, and I look back at that and think, well, he would have loved a lot of what happened. Not so much even with the core business, which was football, but the broadcasting, which came later.
You started off your broadcasting career as a music disc
That's
jockey.
right.
Tell me about that experience and your connection to Subi Oval through music.
Well, I met the strangest people in the world in radio, but if you worked at well, they're all 6, so 6KY, 6PR. If you worked at any of them on the dial here, 6 months was almost due for a long service break, you know, because it was very, very hectic. Like guys were coming and going. Crazy time. It was the time of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and Elton John was just starting up. Elton John had only recently, when he came here for his first tour, they'd built the 3-tier stand. Now, he performed in a shell, and I was working for the station that brought him out, like stations align themselves to these artists. And anyway, a mate of mine and I went down to Subiaco Oval, and I was wowed by him. I wasn't a particular fan. He only had a couple of songs out by that stage. So we're talking his album, Tumbleweed Connection, right back at the beginning. And there he is on stage, and I hadn't heard a sound quite like it. It was one of the strongest pop voices I'd ever heard. Loved the concert, and Subiaco on a nice warm night, and you're sitting in the 3-tier stand, and he's in the shell. Just a lasting memory. Elton John, I'm not so much a fan now, but at the time, he was a knockout.
So are you a big music buff?
Ask my wife. Yeah, I am, and the kids have got it too. So, but I love the music of the 60s, but I really like the music of today too. I wish somebody like the War on Drugs or Father John Misty would come to Subiaco. Well, it's not here anymore, is it? No. Careful what you wish for.
How did playing and coaching for several teams in the Waffle inform your long commentating career? Well,
I like to think that my dad informed it greatly. He certainly wasn't your regular fan. He told me I couldn't boo at the football. You know, like if he caught me booing and I was sitting next to him, so he was always going to catch me, or said anything he thought was a little rough, he'd take me home. He said, we won't stay if you do that. So that being the case, I think I appreciated footballers, men who played the game from the time I started. And when I look back, I think what I learnt probably most was from my father. A lot of coaches along the way, and good ones too, but I think everything as it happened in a sequence: junior football, then you play, and then you coach. And I played and coached for the same club. So you get to understand a lot about football and each of those elements of it. And as a result, I think I was reasonably well grounded. Plus, I had a philosophy given to me by my father about what should happen in football and what his thoughts were. Just that you had to respect the game, respect the people who played the game, and don't get too big for your boots, particularly in a broadcasting sense. Now, he didn't see the broadcasting, he only knew me as a disc jockey. So I often think, you know, I'd like my time over again, or more particularly his time over again, and he would have seen some of the broadcasting because he would have seen a lot of himself in that.
Tell me about, we're talking a lot about sense of place in this podcast. What is Subi Oval to you, and what was it to you as a place?
Well, as I said before, it was like Disneyland. When I got to those gates, there was just that feeling, you know, sort of when you get to a big show, a concert or whatever. It was like that for me when I get to Subiaco gates. I'd sort of, it's hard to explain, but you know, the feeling that you know you belong there, you want to be there, you want to spend as much time as you can, and when you come back the next time, you have all those feelings over again. And that's how Subi was for me. I mean, it was just the vernacular, Subi. That's how you talked about it. You know, everyone knew what you meant. It wasn't the city or the suburb as it was then. It wasn't Subiaco in that sense. It was the ground. It was the heart. That was a beating, living place for a lot of people who just loved their sport and understood it. I think what they're doing there is a very good thing. I mean, a West Australian like Bob Hawke is being recognised amongst all the changes. I think that's great. I've always had a soft spot for the city of Subiaco as well. I mentioned the stadium sort of overrode that for me, but having said that, Subiaco has always been a nice place too, and I think it's going to be even better when they do the landscaping and what have you on these new projects.
Thanks so much, Dennis.
Elsa, terrific.
Thanks for listening to the Stories of Subi podcast. It was created by Creating Communities Australia for Development WA.